Good evening, folks, and welcome to the live stream. I hope you're all very well this evening on this Tuesday evening. Let's see who we have. We have Joe Cake. Great to see you, Joe Cake. Colin, great to have you on. Raven 1983 Witch, great to see you too. Freddie B, great to have you on, Freddie. We have Stu, great to see you, Stu. Hope you're well. Brian Johnston is here. We have the Freckle Pony. We have Tiny Demolition Lover. Hope you're well. We have Cyberkraut, great to see you. Hugh, great to have you on. Hope you're well. Oraman is here. Great to see you. John O'Sullivan, CGM. Great to see you, CGM. Hope you're well. We have Von Nakanizer. Great to see you. We have Young Ralph. Great to see you too. Killer is on. Thanks for moderating, Killer. Great to see you. We have Live Long and Prosper from Star Trek. We also have Nico. Great to see you, Nico. Hope you're well. Nico, check your direct messages. We have Suzanne, great to see you, Suzanne. We also have Ruth, great to see you. Enzo the God is on once again, great to see you. The Lefty Boater, UBI. We have Roshin, great to see you, Roshin. You and me, great to have you on. Reagan Elite, great to see you once again. Steve Martin is on. We have Mad Monk, great to see you again. Marvin is here. Asperger's Europe, great to see you. Ruth is on. Fearless Wolf, great to see you. Hope you're well. Chatty Rat is here too. And so many more. I want to say hello to everyone. Sorry I can't say hello to everyone directly, as we'd be here all night, as you know. 115 viewers. Remember, guys, to smash the button as you come on. I just start off with this sort of funny story. It says here, spot the difference. Boris Johnson appears scrubbed from photo posted by Shaps. It's like something out of the Soviet Union, isn't it? With Stalin removing, I don't know, I don't remember the name of the guy who had removed from that iconic photo. But Grand Shaps, I don't know if Grand Shaps removed it or removed Johnson or somebody linked to Shaps's staff did it. But the photo was after deleted, not reinstated, which is interesting. For some, being ousted from number 10 was apparently not enough for Boris Johnson. Grant Shapps, the business secretary, posted a photo on Twitter that appears to have removed the former prime minister from the picture. Shapps tweeted the image in advance of the rocket launch from Spaceport Cornwall, speaking of his delight at backing the first launch of a satellite from European soil. The photo shows Shapp enjoying a solitary visit to the spaceport, laughing with the Virgin Orbit chief executive Dan Hart and Ian Annett from the UK Space Agency. Social media users were quick to point out that Johnson appeared to have been erased from the image. An identical picture is still on number 10's Flickr account, dated 9th of June 2021. From the former prime minister, with the former prime minister standing between Shapps and Hart, as you can see here. Isn't that weird? Why was Boris Johnson removed? Shapps subsequently deleted this tweet after the apparent editing was spotted by many users, but many users had screen grabbed both images. They even have the no Boris, no Boris, which is better? And I think no Boris is always better, but that's wonderful. Unfortunately, the rocket failed in its mission, but these things happen, unfortunately. Oh, it's European soil now. Yes, that's something I pointed out on Twitter as well. When it's a failure, it's European. If it was a success, they would say British success. But because it wasn't a success, they say a European failure. Yeah, it's typical of Brexiteers. Especially, it was, I think the Times had reported it as a European failure. Once again, if it's a success, it would have been British. Just get rid of Johnson. It's better that way. No Boris is always better. He's not very sharp on these kinds of things. Look, I'm not claiming that Shapps did this deliberately, but it is weird that Johnson was removed. Why was Johnson removed? Is he that much of an embarrassment to the business secretary? Is he that much of an embarrassment to the Conservative government at the moment? Maybe they would have said, why is Boris Johnson there, not the current Prime Minister? Current as in, he could be replaced at any moment. Anyway, bye-bye Boris. Boris, bye-bye. Doris the Johnson. Didn't Stalin do the same with Trotsky? It was Trotsky, yes. Watch out for the ice pick. I was like, who was it? Yeah, it was Trotsky who he had removed from the photo. Grand Shafts needs deleting. Unfortunately, it doesn't get rid of Grand Shafts. It just gets rid of Boris Johnson. Okay, moving on. Rishi Sunak has abandoned Tory pledge on workers' rights, says Jobs Tsar. So the Conservatives' former employment czar has accused Rishi Sunak of abandoning the party's commitment to improve workers' rights after the business minister said many of the policies in the 2019 manifesto would not be implemented imminently. Matthew Taylor, who was recruited by Theresa May to conduct a wide-ranging review of Britain's employment laws, said the government had delayed putting in place many of the measures he recommended in 2017. He was commenting after Kevin Hollinrake, the business minister, said in a series of letters, series of answers to the government, that the government had no immediate plans to implement several of the policy proposals that stemmed from the review. Meanwhile, the government is about to unveil its controversial anti-strike bill, which they did today, that some worry could undermine employment protections further. Taylor told The Guardian, there comes a point when repeated delay starts to feel like abandonment of an agenda. That is a great pity, because at a time when industrial relations are at the forefront, the challenge of improving the quality of work is, if anything, even more urgent than when I wrote my report. This is part and parcel of what the Tories are doing, is about eroding worker protections. And this new bill that's on its way through Parliament at the moment is about, within the bill they say it's about guaranteeing a minimum level of service. But that could be expanded, and it probably will be expanded, to other parts of the economy. So any business would be able to demand a minimum level of service from their workers. And if they don't provide that, they can be fired on the spot. That's what it's about. It starts out in the public sector. It starts out with, so-called critical services. But then it's expanded, of course, further out. Sack the useless government. That's what should be happening. After 0-hour contracts, zero pay contract. That's the way they seem to be going. And they, part of the reason for Brexit was to allow the government to do whatever the hell it wants and run roughshod over protections. There's a petition against the anti-strike law. A minimum level of service. They'll cheerfully break due to lack of staff. Of course, it's insane. So you're demanding that ambulances provide a minimum level of service, and the ambulance unions have said we are going to provide emergency cover. But if at the moment, before any strike action, ambulances can't arrive on time, there are massive delays. How can you expect them to put in a minimum level of service? Like, if they can't provide the service at the moment, and this is what really pissed me off about Grant Shapps, is that he's been on LBC, he's been on the BBC, he's been on a number of outlets, and nobody asks him the question, well, how can they provide a minimum level of service if they don't have the staff? Because he keeps talking about, well, in France and in Italy, they have this already in place. Yes, because they don't have staffing problems. Or if they do, the problems are not as grave as in Britain, or in England in particular. Anyway, on this particular subject,
the government took aim at striking ambulance teams today, saying new laws were needed to protect lives because paramedics' industrial action last month put patients at risk.
Health officials were left guessing at the likely minimum coverage, making contingency planning almost impossible and putting everyone's constituents' lives at risk. The ambulance strike plan for tomorrow still do not have minimum safety levels in place. And this will result in patchy emergency care for the British people, and this cannot continue.
see, this is what he's going to do. This is what the Tories are going to do. People are dying at the moment. They're ignoring the reality that people are dying at the moment. And then when the strikes take place and people die, they'll blame the unions. Although people are already dying because they can't get access to the services they need. But he will, of course, ignore that and then turn around and use the strikes as a political football against the opposition, against the striking leaders, against the workers themselves.
Grant Shapps said the Royal College of Nursing had provided minimum care when nurses went on strike last month. The ambulance workers had not.
Category 1 is for calls about people with life-threatening injuries and illnesses, such as cardiac arrest or serious allergic reaction.
Some in the ambulance service suspect the government would draw the line of minimum service so high their strike was effectively banned.
I'm organising help for you now.
They suspect the government would like them to cover all Category 1 life-threatening calls, which they do already, and all Category 2 calls.
Ambulance service, is the patient breathing?
Rather than just the most serious Category 2 call-outs.
That would mean that most of the crews would be out doing the jobs that they are doing day in, day out. If that's what the government insisted, I can't see how we would be able to picket or strike. Because to be able to meet that level of call and demand would mean that the entirety of the staff have to be working. That's a stealth ban on striking.
Many other countries...
And there you have it. So set the bar really high so that people can't actually go on strike. And you notice the government is setting the bar.
Australia, Canada, parts of America, South Africa and elsewhere actually ban strikes in blue light services. We ban them ourselves for the police, but I'm not even proposing going that far.
But you are doing that. You're doing it by stealth. You're doing it underhandedly.
All I'm saying is please tell us if you're going to withdraw your labour. Let's agree a minimum safety level. I don't think there's anything unreasonable about that whatsoever.
Union leaders met to explore whether they could coordinate future strikes to maximise impact. All condemned the proposed law, which would affect emergency services, but also other sectors, including transport, education and border security.
What it will do is remove the individual's right to strike. And I think if you look at public sentiment, people are very clear. If it comes down to a straight fight between Rishi Sunak, Jeremy Hunt, Steve Barclay and our nurses, our paramedics, our physiotherapists, I know where public sympathy lies, and it lies with those hard-working public servants. So I think the government should think again and step back from these proposals.
For now. But you do not underestimate the power of the right-wing media. Or they will paint the doctors and nurses and the ambulance drivers and everyone else, everyone who's on strike, as the enemy of the people. And it will serve the politicians well, unfortunately. And I believe the longer this goes on, unfortunately, the more likely the public will turn on the strikers. This is why they need to coordinate so that individual unions can't be singled out. And this is what the government are trying to do.
Some Labour MPs said the government was throwing red meat to unite its squabbling backbenchers. A reminder of the Tories' recent torrid history came when it emerged that the Transport Secretary, here pictured with the failed Virgin satellite rocket next to Boris Johnson in the summer, had retweeted the picture with Boris Johnson airbrushed out of the shot. Ambulance picket lines tomorrow will be joined by control room staff, but they'll be staggering their strike hours to make sure emergency calls can still be answered. Anyone seriously ill is still advised to call 999.
Well, strikes by ambulance workers were singled out today by Grant Shapps, as you heard in Gary's report there, as one of the driving factors behind the government's decision to bring forward this legislation. And tomorrow, around 25,000 of them across England and Wales will again walk out over pay. Our health and social care editor, Victoria MacDonald, joins us now from Warwick Hospital. Victoria.
Pickled Witch, thanks so much for that super chat. Job Centre offered free internships for 50 plus today. What? Free internships for 50 plus. So people over the age of 50 will be given an internship. Over the age of 50? But isn't the internship normally for people who are just starting their career? Not somebody who's heading towards pension age. That sounds really weird. Thanks for that super chat, by the way.
Victoria.
Yes, well, you can imagine that the unions were furious about the claims from Grant Shapps that there had been no national agreement for emergency cover. They had always said, they told us, that there would be agreements reached, and indeed there were agreements reached with individual trusts because of the complexities of the staffing levels and the different needs of each region. So they said, instead, the union said that this statement from Grant Shapps was actually downright provocative, coming as it did on the eve of the strikes. And also, they said, just as they'd had what they felt was a reasonably constructive meeting with the health secretary. Now, you can't over-exaggerate this, but they did see an almost small glimmer of hope because they had, for the first time in the meetings, been able to discuss pay. Now, there's been nothing.
Remember, the Tories were saying, we're not going to talk about pay, we're not going to talk about pay, and then finally they agreed to talk about pay. But
today back from the government that could in any way avert the strikes. There's been no mention of any other meetings which could avert further strikes later this month. But they said that they had come away from that meeting feeling a bit better, and now today they didn't.
So, Victoria, what can we expect from tomorrow's strike?
Well, as you heard from Gary, there are both the GMB and Unison will be going out. Now, I'm outside Warwick Hospital, and they have told us that the West Midlands Ambulance Service have assured them that the most urgent patients will be picked up, will be delivered here. There will also be some patient transport services for urgent cases as well, people who need urgent cancer treatments and things like renal dialysis.
I just want to respond to something that you guys are saying in the chat. So job centres are citadels of misery. So this idea that the free internships work for nothing at no upfront cost to yourself. Yeah, feckin' yeah. So as Pickled Witch said, so this idea that the people on universal credit are being offered free slavery. Is that not slavery? So you get your benefits if you do the job, or well, here is the job for you to do, but you won't get paid for that work. You'll just get your benefits. You just get universal credit. And this sounds like something I was talking about over a year ago, where I believe that the goal here is to get people off benefits into jobs, even if those jobs don't pay. And, over 50 internship. That's just slavery. It's not, intern is generally somebody who's training up at the beginning of their career. Now, I don't agree with unpaid internship, because you're doing a job, you should be paid for that. You're providing a service, you should be paid for that. Even if you're at the very beginning of your career, that's okay. It doesn't matter. You should still be paid for if you're doing photocopying, if you're just running errands for people. You should actually be paid for that, because you're putting in your time. But what are they doing here? It seems that they're forcing people over the edge, and this will be forced because at the beginning it's introduced as an option, and then it will be forced. This is a way of getting people off benefits, in a sense, or into jobs. Look how many people we got into employment. Are they really in employment? No, they're not, but it's all about fiddling the figures. It'd be great to have some more information about that. Maybe not yourself, Pickled Witch, but it would be, if anyone else has any articles on that, be interesting to see, because this is, as I was saying before, a form of slavery, forcing people into jobs that they'll have to do, internship for the over 50s, to do what? It'll be sold of course, as this is a way of improving your skills. But generally, people over the age of 50 find it very difficult to gain employment. Doesn't matter what skills they have. Companies prefer to have younger people. And this ageism is a big problem, but this isn't going to solve it.
Dialysis. At the last month's strike, there was a reduction in 32,000 calls, emergency calls in this area. So what they are hoping is that the public will respond to that and not dial 999 unless they absolutely have to.
OK, thanks very much, Victoria.
This is actually another problem where people are holding off from calling 999 because there's maybe I don't want to put pressure on the NHS. This can be a good thing but it can also be a bad thing because people may avoid calling in an emergency when it's a real emergency because they're afraid that they're going to put pressure on the healthcare system or on the ambulance service, or they'll fear that, well, the ambulance won't arrive, so I won't call them, and this could have very serious consequences.
Victoria. Matt.
Now, earlier I spoke.
Conservative is right. People over 50 can always start a YouTube channel. I'm getting there. Okay.
To Jacob Rees-Mogg, who was Business Secretary under Liz Truss, and Rebecca Long-Bailey, who was Shadow Business Secretary under Jeremy Corbyn. I started by asking Mr. Rees-Mogg whether he would be happy to see a nurse sacked as a result of this legislation.
Well, I think the Business Secretary has made it clear that's not the intention of this legislation.
But it might happen.
But if you have minimum services agreements, then people would have a contractual obligation to follow those.
But if you don't have the staff, you friggin' 19th century idiot.
But it wouldn't mean that there wouldn't be an ability to provide a different level of service. That what it would ensure is a basic service is provided, but that there would be instances where people would be able to work differently, short of a full strike on an essential service. So the ability of people to make their point, to make it clear that they weren't happy with their terms and conditions, would remain. But do I think that people...
And how could they complain over their terms and conditions? You're basically saying, okay, if you don't like your terms and conditions, you can't go on strike because we're going to make that illegal.
People should obey and fulfill the contracts of their employment. Yes, of course I do. That's the reasonable part of employment law. It's the quid pro quo, or it's the pro quo for the quid.
But we need all the nurses we can get at the moment. If this legislation is imposed, it could result in nurses getting sacked. Are you happy to see that? Yes or no?
Well, I think you're conflating two completely different things.
No, it's not. It's very clear. You're introducing legislation that will require a minimum level of service, even though that's impossible at the minute. And if people, and within the legislation, it says that if they don't, they could be sanctioned. They would receive a fine, and or sacked, and or termination of employment. Like what? If they can't be sacked, then what's the point in having the threat? Like, Jacob Rees-Mogg knows this. He's just been dishonest as usual.
The recruitment of nurses is an issue, and the training of nurses is an issue, and there are negotiations going on about pay. I think the idea that thousands of nurses would be fired under this legislation is ridiculous. That is not what this legislation will do. That is not the purpose of it.
We don't know that.
Yes, we do. We know that
okay.
It is a fanciful supposition.
Then what is the objective of this legislation? Like, it's like saying, I don't know, you must drive your car with a seatbelt. Okay, is anyone going to be punished if they don't drive their car with a seatbelt? No. Then what's the point of the law? How is the law going to have any effect if you don't actually enforce it? Like, is he suggesting it's not going to be enforced? people can actually break the rules, break this, go against this legislation and not be punished. Maybe Jacob is actually advising nurses, to hell with this legislation, do as you wish, because we're not actually going to enforce it.
Of a circumstance that would not arise, that the aim is to ensure a minimum service. You don't end up firing the police because they go on strike, because they recognise they've got to provide the service.
Because if the police don't provide the service, they are put in prison.
You don't fire the army when they have to stand in for ambulance drivers if ambulance drivers go on strike, because they recognise that's part of their terms and conditions. People accept the terms and conditions they have.
Okay, but so you're basically saying that for these, when you join the army, you know that you're not allowed to go on strike. Is this now the new rule for doctors and nurses, or ambulance drivers? When you sign the contract, you're not going to be able to go on strike. That's going to really encourage so many people to join the service. Remember, there's 170,000 vacancies at the moment. So anyone who's considering joining nursing will have to take on board the fact that they probably won't be able to go on strike.
Have, if they're reasonable, and not striking in essential services is reasonable, proportionate, and to Ms Long-Bailey's point, legal as well. What Parliament passes into law is the law of the land.
Rebecca Long-Bailey, I know that Jacob Rees-Mogg and this government doesn't like to follow Europe's lead, but they have mentioned the fact...
I just want to respond to Derek. Derek says, are the DUP on strike? Can we prosecute them? Yes. How come the DUP can't be fired? He's fired as an MP. Unfortunately, you can't do that, but that would be an interesting take, definitely. The DUP, of course, are refusing to take up their positions in the Northern Ireland Assembly and allow an executive to be formed because of something they voted for.
That this is a law that's already in existence in Spain, in France, in Italy, for instance, for exactly the same reasons. What's your answer to that?
There are very different conditions that exist in other parts of Europe. They have a more comprehensive collective bargaining system where many employers already engage frequently with those governments. So to discuss a minimum service level agreement before a strike would be easy to facilitate in these countries. We don't have that here in the UK. We've got some of the worst trade union legislation in...
And she's correct. There isn't the oversight in the UK as there is in Europe. There aren't the worker protections because over the last number of years the Tories have been working to get rid of these protections. And since Brexit, these protections are going to go out the window completely.
In the world as a result of various Conservative governments that have tried to drive down trade union rights. Now we've got to get to the heart of what this is about, because the government know that this piece of legislation will be beset with legal challenges and legal problems, and we have to see this stunt for what it is really. They're trying to frighten key workers away from the negotiating table to stop using their right to strike and ask for better pay, terms and conditions and funding for their sector now. That's what they're trying to do, close this debate down. And unfortunately, I think the public can see this for what it is. The public are behind striking workers. They want to see negotiations and they want to see our key workers being respected and paid fairly.
So are you now telling me that you, Jacob Rees-Mogg, arch-Brexiteer, are happy to follow the lead of European countries like Italy, France and Spain on this?
Well, I think that's a silly point, quite honestly.
That's a very, very serious point, actually.
It's not a serious point at all.
Come on, a little bit of generosity from you on that.
It's a joke point. Just because the sun shines in Spain doesn't mean that I'm against the sun shining in England. And to
Okay, I have enough of this guy. Alex says, thanks for that super chat. Remember, clap for strikers, then message your MP and the Prime Minister. Well said. Guys, do that. Even if your MP is not a Tory, clap for strikers and send a message to your MP, a letter to your MP, asking them to clap for strikers too. Jacob Rees-Mogg, we can only take so much of this guy. Anyway, let's move on. It says here, public sector strike row escalates as unions plan coordinated day of action. The government standoff with public sector workers has escalated with plans for a coordinated day of action by unions who've reacted furiously to proposed legislation that would let ministers in effect ban strikes in some areas. The day of action discussed by unions representing staff in the NHS, railways, education, and the civil service at the Trade Unions Congress, the TUC, headquarters in London, could include some synchronised strike action as well as rallies. It's not yet a general strike, but it is getting. I think it's getting close to that, and you know the Tories with this legislation have really fired the starting gun on it. Brad, thanks so much for that super chat. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Met Police, former Met Police founder. So Robert Peel in 1829. I think there may actually be it's not a photograph. What's the things that came before photographs? The ones that were on, was it glass or metal sheets? I don't. I'll have to ask Mrs. Max. She remembers the name. Damn it! I forgot the name of them. So, predating the photograph. So there's probably one of Jacob Rees-Mogg and Robert Peel that shaking hands over a cup of tea. While the TUC say comparisons with the general strike are wide of the mark, they say existing anger over declined real terms pay and staff shortages have been fueled by the proposed anti-strike law unveiled on Tuesday. Grant Shapps, the business secretary, told the Commons the bill would enshrine the right to strike, but also ensure the safety of the British public, and that nothing more than put in place did nothing more than put in place protections already used in other countries. Once again, there isn't the staff that the UK doesn't have the same staffing levels as other countries. So he's comparing apples and oranges here. Alistair, thanks so much for that super chat. Why don't the TUC call a general election? Hi, Max. I think you mean a general strike. The general strike would be the nuclear option. The problem with that is that you can't really go back. And if you lose, I think they would prefer to use it as a threat. It's probably more effective as a threat, as a deterrent against the government. And because there's a risk that it would fail and then you have no other option. You're out of options. And a general strike would be extremely damaging to the public, extremely damaging to the economy, and damaging to workers because they wouldn't get paid in many cases. And then beyond that, you have nothing. So I think coordinated action is very close to a general strike, but not calling a general strike may actually be the better approach, at least for now. An oil painting. Maybe it was an oil painting. Blood-drawn pentagrams. Daguerreotypes. Yes, daguerreotypes were the electroplate. Maybe it was electroplate daguerreotypes. Daguerreotypes, I think was the name. Brass rubbings. Something like that. But unions and Labour said the proposal for statutory minimum service levels in 6 areas: health, education, ambulance, transport, fire, border security and nuclear decommissioning would exacerbate disputes that need to be resolved by negotiation, not legislation. The brief text of the bill contained no detail about what would constitute a minimum service level of any of the relevant sectors, though Shapps told MPs that ministers would consult on this for fire, ambulance, transport, including rail. So they haven't actually said what a minimum level of service is. So this will be to the discretion. This will be to the discretion of ministers. So ministers will decide what a minimum level of service is. So the legislation is extremely opaque and vague. You can do whatever you want, basically. As declines. Freckle Punny, thanks so much for that super chat. I think Jacob Rees-Mogg is still the Chief Jack the Ripper suspect. He still has his original top hat and cape. Hiding in plain sight, it seems. Thanks for that. Andre, thank you so much for that super chat. My 50s internship, chat GPT prompt engineer. Good luck with that. I don't know how many internships there will be for that, but you can try. And good luck. Thanks for that super chat. Ministers decide. No, the IEA and the ERG decide. Well said, Gaza. Why isn't Shapps in prison? Because I think Michael Green is doing time instead. They caught Michael Green, but they couldn't catch Grant Shapps. Guys, we're about halfway through the stream, so I just want to take a short break. We'll have our comedy moment, and then we'll be back in just a moment with our serious discussion. So I hope you enjoy this.
Before granting you entry to Spain, you must first answer these simple questions. What is Spain's biggest export?
Spanish students.
See. What is Spain's biggest import?
Irish criminals.
See. How would you describe Spanish architecture?
A bit gaudy.
See. Where do you find the majority of the Spanish workforce?
In bed.
See. Construction of the Sagrada Familia Cathedral began in 1886 and was finished when?
Any day now.
See. What is considered the most magnificent villa in all of Spain?
David Villa.
See. What traditional barbaric act is still legal in Spain?
Calling a Catalonian Spanish.
See. Where do tourists part with most of their money in Spain?
Walking up La Rambla.
See. In Spain, which bin do you use to discard food waste?
The paella pan.
See. What two groups in Spain have caused unrest and clashed with authorities over the years?
Real Madrid and Barcelona.
See. Where do you go if you commit tax fraud in Spain?
Home.
See. What famous Spanish cruise do tourists flock to?
Penelope.
See. Name Spain's most notorious serial killer.
Bullfighter Jose Tomas.
See. How would you describe tapas?
A bit of everything.
See. How would you describe paella?
A bit of everything.
See. What resources did Spain extract from its colonies?
A bit of everything.
See. Welcome to Spain. I will sign your papers, but not now. It's the middle of the day, so good night.
Oh, okay. Hopefully nobody here from Spain has been offended.
Had a productive.
Continuing with the strike action, here is the Health Secretary.
Discussion with the trade unions yesterday. The key focus of the meeting was to look at next year's pay review body and the evidence that we submit to that. We want to work constructively with the unions in terms of the evidence that is submitted there and obviously building on what has come out from the OBR and what is affordable to the wider economy. But of course, as part of that meeting, we also listened to the trade unions in terms of their concerns in respect of this year. That's part of a wider discussion that is happening across government where other departments, other secretaries of state are meeting with their trade unions. And of course, I will take those messages back from the health unions in terms of my discussions with the Chancellor.
Yeah, right. And what was it Bart Simpson used to say? What you'll actually do is get bent. That's what basically he's going to tell the unions who are on strike. Yeah, listen to what you have to say, but it's not going to make any difference.
So what's the hold up here? Is it the Treasury that's holding things up? I mean, you seem keen to compromise on pay. Why is it taking so long?
Actually, it's very difficult. I'll leave this video because it's very difficult to hear what the question is. For some reason, they didn't allow us to hear the question. Anyway, let's continue. Doctors leader says discharge plan must be properly funded to stop unsustained pressures being shifted to GPs. So as we know, one of the Steve Barclay there, one of his plans to deal with the crisis in the NHS is to move people out of the NHS into care homes. But there's also a problem for GPs as well. GPs fear the government's plan to discharge thousands of hospital patients into care homes could lead to family doctors being even more overloaded. The Royal College of GPs today voiced concern that the move to help the NHS cope with its intense winter crisis by freeing up hospital beds will add to the pressure on already overstretched GP surgeries. The Health Secretary Steve Barclay yesterday announced plans for the NHS to spend £200 million, which I think is of existing budgets, so it's not new money, of course, buying up places in care homes to take 2,500 discharged patients who were deemed medically fit to leave. This is interesting. So these are people who are medically fit. They're going to be moved into care homes. But the problem, as I said before, in care homes, they don't have the staff. Now, in some cases, they have the beds, but that will mean that if they do see an influx, they'll have to recruit staff. And that takes time. Unless, there's a whole load of staff that are just waiting to be called. But I don't think that's the case. That would ease hospital overcrowding and reduce the amount of time ambulance crews spend outside A&E waiting to unload a patient. The chair of the RCGP told The Guardian she supported the policy in principle as the right thing to do. However, family doctors are already working to our limits right now and could not easily become responsible for even more patients, many of whom are likely to be frail and elderly. She said NHS pressures are being felt right across the health service, including in general practice. GPs and our teams have a vital role supporting patients in the community, including when they've been discharged from hospital and when they're waiting for hospital treatment. But we are working to our limits right now, making more consultations every month than before the pandemic, yet with fewer trained full-time relevant GPs, equivalent GPs. It is the right thing to do is to look for ways to safely move patients out of hospital when they are well enough to leave, but not necessarily well enough to go home and look after themselves, but to create capacity in hospitals for the many other patients who need beds, but also because it is more cost effective and generally because people want to be cared for closer to their homes. But Hawthorne added, any such initiative must be properly resourced and staffed, otherwise it will be just shifting unsustainable pressures from one area of the health service to another, and again risking patient safety. And this is exactly the point that I was trying to make. Is it's about shifting pressure from one part of the NHS to another, hoping that the public will believe that the government are doing something. It's not actually about doing something, it's about convincing the public that you are. It's about tricking people into thinking that the government are actually doing something. And this is extremely dangerous because it's putting extra pressure on GPs and carers and those in the care homes when they're already at breaking point. But it will look good in the newspaper. See, Steve Barclay fixed the problem. Look, Rishi Sunak has fixed the problem. Wait for his polling to go back up again. That's what it's about. You just can't buy beds in care homes if there's no staff. The care homes can't take them. The pay needs to rise so more people will work there. Well said, Sugar Free. If care is probably, I'm not exactly familiar with the rates, but as far as I know, it's the lowest end when it comes to pay generally in healthcare. The care homes are the worst paid. So if you want to encourage people to join, you're going to have to increase the pay. And it can't be just, here's £1,000, a once-off payment of £1,000 to cover this. That's not going to work. There needs to be, and also the conditions have to be improved. You have to be able to provide better working conditions and pay. It's not just the money itself. Because people are not going to do jobs if they know that they're going to be working 70 hours a week or something like that. Anyway,
Now, there is no single chart I can show you, or even selection of charts that's going to tell you the full story, the definitive story of what's going on in the health system.
It's minimum wage. It's usually minimum wage. Problem made worse in care homes by the lack of EU workers due to Brexit. Well said, you and me. Yes, it's some of them get paid £9.50 an hour. Bumbling Boris buffoon. Sorry I'm late again. Maybe the Tories can make a law against it. Probably. you have to increase the wages. If you don't increase the wage, you're not going to encourage people to join. And you can't just rely on people from outside the country, because it costs money to bring them in. Why? Because of the frigging visas that the Brexiteers wanted. And why do the Brexiteers want them? Because it makes them palatable with the racists and bigots. Magic, thanks so much for that super chat. The idea of 4,000 care beds works out to be 18 per trust, which frankly is sod all. Yeah, there are hundreds of trusts, so 18 per trust, it's not going to make much difference. But once again, thanks for that super chat. Once again, there's also the problem of the staff. Where are you going to find the staff? They don't have the staff available, and they don't have the resources to hire more ones because it's expensive.
Right now, but we can make a start and we get a kind of sneak preview at looking what's going on. And one of the most striking things is looking at staffing levels versus performance levels or versus output. Because what you can see, and this might seem surprising, is that actually there have been considerably more staff in the NHS now than there were back in 2019, so pre-pandemic, particularly in those frontline areas. So nurses, consultants, support staff to clinical staff, senior managers as well, and junior doctors. All of those staffing levels are up considerably. But does that transfer through to actual procedures? Well, no, we're going to bring on procedures. Look at the bars. Those procedures have gone down, OK? So GP appointments, first cancer appointments up, but outpatient appointments, people coming off the waiting list, elective admissions, emergency admissions, all those red bars, they are down. So it's this strange paradox where you've got staffing up and then procedures down. And that's one of the strange things that people are trying to work out, to understand at the moment, as are other kind of metrics of performance. And many of those metrics are similarly depressing. This one just shows you how many people are having to wait for 2 weeks, or indeed more than 2 weeks, for a first consultation for cancer. The higher this line is, the more people are not having to wait over a fortnight. So the higher this is, the better things are. And what you can probably make out is that line was actually above where you might hope for it to be up until around kind of, when is that, 2017, 2018. But then even before the pandemic, it was starting to come down a little bit. Then you had COVID, and look at this line. So you're going from about 5% of people facing those long waits to about 25% of people. It's a real sign of, those concerns with the UK health system, which, of course, leading to worse outcomes for patients, particularly when it comes to cancer. And there are many charts we could look at that show you a similar story in different parts of the health system.
But why isn't this replicated in other countries? It doesn't seem to be replicated in other countries. Why is that? Alistair, thanks so much for that super chat. Care workers are not on the visa list. Yes, so there's there's a special list where shortage occupation list. Heavy goods vehicle drivers were trying to get onto it. I don't know if they actually finally succeeded. That was a crisis, at the beginning of Brexit. And yeah, carers are not considered skilled, so they're not considered important when they are important. And this is a problem when it comes to skill, when it comes to getting the workers you need in. Thanks for that.
One other kind of potential explanation for this, it's not necessarily staffing because we have more staff in hospitals, but maybe it might be something else. It might be a shortage of hospital beds, places to treat people. And typically, this is the kind of range at which we would expect to see long occupancy in hospital beds over the past few years. So that's the typical level. Here's this year we're in at the moment. Look, 2022-23 actually significantly higher than normal. So more people stuck in hospital beds for longer. And what are the explanations for that? Partly it's because it's tougher to get discharged because you've got problems in social care right now, so you don't necessarily have the beds and the care to get to. But partly it's another story, which is we don't necessarily have enough of those hospital beds. And when you look at the big picture here, comparing the UK to other countries around the world, well, it really is stark. The UK has one of the lowest levels of hospital beds per 1,000 of the population of pretty much any country within the OECD. So
now, it's important not to get confused here because low numbers or occupancy in beds is not always... Having a low number is not always a bad thing. Because it can also depend on the level of health in the country. So if there's a high level of health in the country, you don't need a high number of beds beds available because people don't get sick that much.
Developed well.
But I don't think that's the case here.
And I should say these charts have looked like this for quite some time. The UK had kind of low investment and low hospitalisation for a long time. And the story when you come to look at things like MRI scanners or CT scanners is even worse. That the UK, the very worst in the developed world when it comes to CT scanners. So that's very striking. But if we take a step back and look at overall investment, well, here's a chart you might have seen something like recently. This is showing you capital investment in health. So basically how much the government is investing, putting into the health system. And that kind of grey area is many other countries around Europe. You can see them there. So from Austria and Canada as well. So it's got Canada and the US as well, and France too. That's where they are. But the red line is the UK. And you can see up until about 2010, the UK was tracking along more or less.
What happened in 2010? I can't put my finger on it. Something happened in 2010 that resulted in less capital investment. And this is probably where I think they've really hit the nail on the head here. I think this is where the problem is. It's not so much staffing. It's not so much beds. It's about investment. And if you don't have the investment, the capital investment, it doesn't matter really how much staff you have. It doesn't really matter how many beds you have. If you don't have the capital investment, building hospitals, investing in infrastructure, in equipment, if you don't have that big investment, you're going to have problems. But I still don't understand what happened in 2010.
Mid-table, and then you had austerity, then you had the big cuts in capital spending, and the UK becomes an outlier. And that's, well, it's pretty stark, isn't it? But here's the thing. If you take a different range of countries and add, for instance, Spain or Japan, both of which have health systems which some people have said are kind of similar to the kind of beverage-style health system that we have in the UK, look, we'll add them on, and then suddenly that pack is a bit bigger, and the UK doesn't look like an outlier anymore. Actually, other countries are lower, and the UK just goes from being kind of high mid-table to being quite kind of low mid-table.
Okay, but if you already have good infrastructure, if you already have high quality healthcare already there, then maybe you don't need to invest so much.
Not saying that's necessarily a good thing, but it does just underline it's a really complex story right now. The thing you can't dispute is the fact that you have some serious problems. The NHS is facing pressure right now, and no one is entirely sure whether there is a quick fix for it.
There is no quick fix for it. Because if it seems to be the problem, I think the problem really stems from social care. It's creating a problem for the NHS because it's creating a backlog. So even if the social care sector was functioning, the NHS would be fine, or pretty much fine, or at least in a better condition. When we talk about money, it's also important to talk about waste. And here's a perfect example of waste. Labour challenges Sunak to say how much money he wasted by travelling jet from London to Leeds for a visit. Labour has challenged Rishi Sunak to say how much money he wasted by using a jet to travel from London to Leeds yesterday, Angela Rayner, the Labour deputy leader, said. Families will be rightly angered by the show of extravagance by Rishi Sunak. Was it his own jet? No, it was a government jet. If it was his own jet, then probably it wouldn't be so much of a problem. Patients and staff are crying out for action from this government in the midst of a crisis in our NHS, while the Prime Minister jets from London to Leeds for a photo opportunity. The Prime Minister must come clean about how much taxpayers' money was wasted on this 36-minute plane journey for a 3-hour visit at the height of a cost of living crisis. It's, he treats it as royalty. He's a billionaire. He's not going to travel by train. Why would he be seen with the great unwashed? He's above that. He's basically aristocracy. No, he doesn't travel with the riffraff. Sunak doesn't care much about the money he wastes. Yes. Okay, moving on. I want to show you this tweet here about Scotland. What's interesting about what ministers in Scotland are doing? It says here, in the title under the Independent, says Nicola Sturgeon, Scottish ministers will donate pay rises to public purse. So the Scottish ministers, government ministers, are getting a pay rise, and they're actually going to give back their pay rises and donate it to the public, to the Exchequer, which is a good thing. This person called Haggis says Westminster MPs will be given their annual pay rise of over £2,000. Wonder will they do the same? No, they will not. Maybe 30p Lee Anderson will buy meals with it. Buy lots of meals for 30p, but I don't think that's going to happen. Private jets are terrible for the environment too. Yes, it's a waste of resources, waste of money, but it's also extremely damaging. They're probably the worst thing for the environment, worst form of transport for the environment. Rishi Sunak claiming to care about net zero, care about the environment. He doesn't give a crap. He's acting just like Boris Johnson was, saying one thing and doing another. It's all for show when they say we care about the environment. Remember Liz Truss and her £500,000 jet, private jet to Australia, to New Zealand. To Australia. Yes. They treat the job as if they are aristocracy. I'm much more important than ordinary people. I wouldn't be seen dead on public transport, this sort of thing. The only time they appear on public transport is when they're opening a new line, or when new carriages are bought or something like that. Okay, guys, I want to move on to another story. What's happening on the other side of the world for a moment.
Brasilia, the architectural wonder built from scratch to symbolize Brazilian democracy. But today the clear-up continues after the storming and trashing of those very seats of power by supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro, whom they believe has been unseated unjustly. An act of defiance against President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who was sworn in last week following an October election that divided Brazil. Late last night, Lula inspected the damage caused to the presidential and judicial buildings, flanked by cabinet members and journalists. And in a meeting with governors, representatives and Supreme Court justices, he wanted to show he is firmly in charge and vowed to find and punish those responsible. And he reminded the country about its not-so-old military dictatorship times, criticizing his own army.
Everyone here is aware of the number of people that were tortured for not agreeing with the military regime. And now there were people freely calling for a coup in front of the military headquarters. And none of them have done anything. No general stood up to say, this can't happen, it's forbidden to ask for that. It gives the impression that there were people who liked it when the people were calling for a coup.
And this is a big problem for Brazil. They're always, a few steps away from a military dictatorship. Bolsonaro supporters were calling for it, and the military. Of course, there are people in the military who would be very happy to return to a military dictatorship, because how did they benefit from that? Money and power, but primarily money. They're able to siphon off some of contracts, government contracts, siphon off cash for themselves, create positions of power within the state for themselves. It's military dictatorships are, something to be avoided at all costs. And if there's this terrible fear that Brazil could return to that, I think it was many people were very worried a few days ago when this action was taking place, that the military would pick a side, and that's not what should be happening.
According to Lula, more than 1,500 people who took part in the attack have been detained and will remain in jail until the investigation is completed. Across the country, people have also taken to the streets, demanding retribution for the perpetrators. In Brazil's biggest city, Sao Paulo, thousands line Paulista Avenue in support of their new president.
These people have to be punished. The bosses have to be punished. Those who are giving money have to be punished. Brazil is much bigger than what they showed there. Those people do not represent Brazil. We represent Brazil.
The fight now is to support the government that was democratically elected, and we are not going to leave the streets. That is the message.
Bolsonaro himself is currently in a Florida hospital. A social media post stating...
Why is he in a Florida hospital? Why isn't he in a hospital in Brazil?
He was admitted with abdominal pain. He's yet to admit defeat in October's tight-fought election, but has denied responsibility for encouraging the rioters, although he has condemned the attack.
Are these people supposed to be patriots? Like, what more patriotic action than destroying government buildings? Really, they're just thugs, and of course it's reminiscent of what happened on the 6th of January in 2021 in Washington.
Back in Brasilia, families of the detainees wait outside the police academy, where more than 1,200 people are still locked in. All those I spoke to voted for Bolsonaro and believe without any proof the elections were stolen. I asked one family member if he believed Lula did not win the elections.
I don't believe he did. I think they put him there. There is a new world order that wants to dominate the whole planet.
What is it with these conspiracy theorists? Oh, it's was it the World Economic Forum? Then before that it was something else, and before that was the Illuminati. And I'm actually curious. What is it? Is it the World Economic Forum this year, or what will it be this year, or will it be something else? These conspiracy theorists come up with every year some new conspiracy. These are the ones who want to rule us. And you see it everywhere. You see it. In the UK with Nigel Farage and Gammon Brexit News, and they're walking a thin line there, but they're supportive of these ideas that there's this world order that is trying to control everything. So it's much more simple. It's about money. Okay, people who have money and people who don't have money, and the people who have money control things, but over the people who don't. And it's not some grand conspiracy. It's you can find out, there are people who run the newspapers, have lots of money, and they convince people who have nothing to be angry and to be engaging in conspiracy theories. It's quite simple. You have to create an enemy for the ordinary people, and it's generally somebody who has less than you. Immigrants, people in dinghies, single mothers, people who are disabled, trade unionists. These are all the enemy. They have less than you, or they're on the same level as you, but they're a problem. Never look up. Never ask, why are the people who are telling me to be angry? What is their angle? What is their goal?
And I asked what he thought of the violence on Sunday.
I am against it. As a teacher and a leader of opinion, I will never support acts of violence.
But? Okay.
The detainees are being slowly transferred to a local jail. But with no clear organized protest movement, and with so many under arrest, the authorities face a tough challenge dealing with such an enormous criminal investigation, run by a government that has only just got into power.
Guillermo Galvez reporting. Well, our foreign affairs correspondent Sikandar Kamani was in Brazil during that tense election last year. And Sikandar, you've been speaking to Bolsonaro's supporters today. What have they been telling you?
That's right, Matt. Let's dive into the Bolsonarista universe, because they see themselves
not as aggressors, but as victims. And they're convinced that Lula has stolen this election and that he's going to transform Brazil into a communist state, despite there being no evidence of that. And the reason that they only took to the streets after Lula had been inaugurated was because they were convinced that up until the last moment, there would be a military coup preventing him from taking power. Now, as for the violence and destruction that we saw on Sunday, many are dismissing it as the work of left-wing infiltrators. Now, it does seem that discussions within the far right even were revolving primarily around a peaceful takeover of the areas around these government buildings. But this is clearly an attempt to respond to the public backlash against Bolsonaro supporters.
Of course, yeah, it's not no, we were not the ones getting him. We saw the same when it came to the January 6th, where it was not Trump supporters, it was these groups who infiltrated. Yeah, right.
That we're now seeing. Interestingly, one Bolsonaro supporter that I was talking to today gave me some details about how plans to converge on Brasilia was drawn up on the messaging app Telegram using code words and innocuous names for groups like Brazilian Cooking, for example, to avoid detection by the Brazilian authorities.
Okay, and social media, is an incredibly important part of this. It all sounds a little bit like what happened in Washington 2 years ago on January the 6th.
That's right. Social media is a key to this because misinformation online played a huge role in Bolsonaro's rise to power. Conspiracy theories were spread and shared online throughout this latest election campaign. I've been speaking to one academic about the response of social media companies.
So they did do more than they used to, because especially Google, YouTube really did nothing or barely nothing before this year. So this year, last year, they demonetized some of the big far-right channels. So they are doing more, but I think one of the bottlenecks there is definitely WhatsApp. And for sure, a lot of these organizations for these protests, for this movement, goes through WhatsApp. And WhatsApp, of course, is much more difficult to moderate.
Well, diving a bit further down this rabbit hole, one Bolsonaro supporter told me what really energized the movement was what he considered a secret message held within Bolsonaro's last live address as president. And in that, just as the live stream's about to end, someone appears to say the word selva. And it's a Portuguese battle cry that the protesters have adopted as their own kind of slogan in recent days. It's not clear why it was said. Bolsonaro has distanced himself from events on Sunday. But just as people are still poring over what led up to January the 6th in Washington, they're going to be poring over what led up to January the 8th in Brasilia for some time to come.
And then what's next? So, guys, we're almost at the end of the stream. I want to say thank you so much for everyone who came on. Thank you so much for your super chats. Greatly appreciated. WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, yes. So, good luck with getting that regulated. I want to say thank you to the moderators for doing a wonderful job. Before we finish, of course, we have our one for the road, which we will see now.
So, Minister, do you admit that the NHS is in crisis? Look, I'm not going to sit here and say that things couldn't be better in the NHS. It's undeniably under a lot of pressure, like Tory's coffee's blood. But that's why I believe in delivering on our 5 priorities for the country: halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping small boats. But is there a crisis? Crisis is a very big word. It's only 6 letters. You obviously studied maths to 18. Are you saying there isn't any problem at all? Look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you there isn't a problem. Well, I mean, you're welcome to stand. The cameras are adjustable. The point is that we've had a pandemic, and there's nothing we could have done about that, except deal with it better. But that had nothing to do with me. Wasn't eat out to help out your idea? Who knows where ideas really come from? But I believe in delivering on our 5 priorities for the country: halving, growing, stopping, cutting and boats. Social care is of course a major part of the problem. How can you improve that when care workers are only paid £18,000 a year? Look, I want care workers to feel valued. By paying them more? More value doesn't necessarily equal more money. Did you study maths to 18? I talk to care workers all the time in my head, and they tell me they want to be respected, professionalised and qualified, not paid more, which is lucky. Would you do a care worker's job for £18,000 a year? No, because I already have a job. But what if you didn't, say, after the next election? Look, people have different skills. Some people are skilled at caring, other people are skilled at not caring. which is actually more lucrative. Are you registered with a private GP? Well, obviously I am, but I'm not going to admit that, am I? Why not? Because I have to pretend that we're all in this together, and because I believe in our 5 priorities: halving boats, cutting times, growing debts, and reducing stops. Do you still believe in the monarchy? I do, and I believe that King Charles's coronation this year will do a huge amount of good. Because if watching a man chosen by a quirk of fate riding in a golden chariot to pick up a diamond-encrusted hat during a cost-of-living crisis can't bring this country together, then I don't know what can. Last question. Do you think the Conservative Party can survive? Yes, if we deliver on our priorities. Waiting, half-cut, stopping growth on a small boat. Minister? Look, I'm not going to sit here anymore. Thank you, Minister. Next up, as Keir Starmer sets out his vision for Britain for what feels like the 50th time, we ask, is the country now ready to vote for Labour? Or do we need a few more relaunches just to be sure?
Wonderful. So guys, have a great week. I'll see you on Friday, same bat time, same bat channel. Thanks once again to everyone who sent a super chat. Thanks to everyone who came on and smashed the like button if you haven't smashed it on the way out. And I'll see you on Friday. Take care. And once again, thanks to the moderators for doing a great job. See you on Friday. Take care. Good night.